2011. I was traveling from East Tennessee down to Atlanta, Georgia. I was working on my doctorate of ministry at a seminary just there on the east side of downtown Atlanta in a little town called Decatur. And it had become a routine for me to travel down a couple of times a year for these 2-week classes, and I was on my way. It was a Sunday evening by the time I had hit the outskirts of Atlanta, and I jumped on 285 that goes around, actually goes all the way around Atlanta, but I was heading around the east side towards Stone Mountain where I would get off to go to Decatur. And as I made my turn onto 285 and I'm going around, it's a Sunday evening, usually the traffic's not bad, and I look in front of me and there's 6 lanes of traffic, dead stop. Now, if you know anything about me, you know I don't like to sit in traffic. I will find a way, I don't care if it's a longer way, I will find a way to get around traffic just so I don't have to sit in traffic. That's just me. And so I just dove off on this exit that was coming up right before the traffic was backed up. I didn't know where I was going, but I was like, okay, I'll just click on the GPS and I'll figure it out, right? So I dove off and I ended up on Route 100, State Route 400, which was a 4-lane that went right down into the heart of Atlanta. What I didn't know about this road, though, is that it's a toll road. And I knew for a fact that I didn't have any cash. And I looked at my little cup thing that I keep change in my car, and I rummaged through there, and I was like, there's like 86 cents in here. It's probably not going to cover the toll. I was like, certainly, they're up to date. They'll take credit cards, they'll take debit cards, right? Wrong. They didn't take them. So I pull up to the toll booth, I see cash only, that says it all the way across the board. I didn't have one of those Georgia Peach passes or whatever it was, and I explained to the person there, I said, I don't know what to do. It says you don't take credit cards, is that correct? She's like, yeah, we don't take it, just cash only. And I said, well, I don't have enough cash. I said, so what are my options? And she said, well, you're just gonna have to go through the toll booth and you're going to get a toll fine. I was like, well, what's that? And she's like, it'll be $45. I'm a little bit of a cheapskate. I was like, well, what are my other options? Like, I don't want to pay $45. That's ridiculous. And she's like, I said, can I like just turn around? She's like, no, there's no place for you to turn around. I go, well, then what are my other options? And she kind of got a little smart with me. She's like, well, you can get out of your car and go to the car behind you and ask them for money. Well, by golly, I put my car in park. I open the door. Late Sunday evening, I get out of my car, it is dark, I go back to the car behind me, which in retrospect probably wasn't the smartest thing to do in the evening in downtown Atlanta, but I did it anyways. And I get back there and it's a car full. And they are dressed to the nines. Like, I mean, they're in suits and really nice dresses, and I was like, okay. And they kind of roll down the window just a little bit, and I explained to them then my predicament, that I'm stuck, I don't have any cash, they don't take cards, and I don't want to pay $45. And the lady at the booth said I could ask somebody behind me for money. And they're like, oh. And they're like, you're from Tennessee? It's like, yeah. I said, I'm a pastor and I'm down here working on my doctorate of ministry. And when I said that, the whole car erupted. It was like they were worshiping in there, and they were praising Jesus, and they were high-fiving one another. And I heard this one lady in the back say, we get to help a preacher tonight. And they were excited. And then I realized that they were actually coming back from church. They were members at New Hope African Methodist Episcopal Church in Atlanta. And we just started kind of having like a little worship service right there. And we're getting to know one another, and they're getting the money for me through the window. And the lady up at the toll booth is like, sir, you're backing it up. And so we said our goodbyes. I thanked them. I went back and I gave the $3, $4, whatever the toll was, and I was off. Right there, on a Sunday evening, sun is already down, on State Route 400 in downtown Atlanta, I opened my door because someone offered an invitation to me to do this. And I went back to the car behind me, and in that moment, in a time of need that I had, I found community. in the most unlikely of places, I found community. I needed community right then and there, and God provided it for me. I would say now, especially more than any time in recent history, I would say now people need community more than ever. There was a study done in 2015 asking Americans about their level and experience of loneliness. So this would have been 7 years ago, and after conducting the study, which they planned to continue, after conducting the study, they found that 1 out of every 4 Americans, so about 25% of the people that they polled, said that they experienced some form of regular loneliness in 2015. 1 out of 4. They were doing the study every 5 years, and so they did it again in 2020. This was before the pandemic. And what they found in 2020 was that it had gone up, actually. It had gone from 25% to 44%. In just 5 years, people were experiencing more regular loneliness. Well, it was just right after they had taken that poll that the pandemic hit, and the number shot through the roof. Over 61% of the people, just a few months into the pandemic, they decided not to wait 5 years. They decided, let's do another poll real quick. We know this pandemic's been tough. So they, like 8 months into it, they did another poll, and it had shot up to over 61% of people said that they experienced regular bouts of loneliness. There's a solution to loneliness, and that's called community. We need community. We need it in a pandemic, and we need it even without a pandemic. We are people who are in need of one another. We need connection with other people. We need community. And when I read the biblical story, I read a God story that is full of community and connections. In fact, when we read the Bible and you start reading the very first book, Genesis, you find out real quick that God has done a quick calculation of all of creation, and he makes a realization. God says it's not good for Adam to be alone. And so God did something different at that point. God realized that we don't do well alone. God's creation, those of us created in God's very image, we need community. Now think about Jesus. Jesus, right at the beginning of his ministry, goes out into the wilderness, and he's alone, and he's tested, and he's tempted by Satan. And he comes out of it. But you know what Jesus' first act is after coming out of that period of being alone and being tempted and being tested? His first act is to create community. He starts calling people, calling those people we would come to know as the disciples, starts calling them and inviting them to follow him. And some of them just literally dropped everything they were doing and they followed. Others said to others, hey, come along and meet the person that we believe is the Messiah. Come and follow us. Jesus understood that community was very necessary for his ministry to keep on going. What you'll even find with Jesus is he had a community of 3. There were 3 disciples he was particularly close to. Of course, he had the 12 who followed him around for 3 years. And then there was even a slightly larger community that we know about because the Bible talks about it. There was about 70 people who were pretty regular with Jesus because the scriptures tell us that Jesus actually sent them out in groups of 2 to do ministry. Community was important to Jesus. We also go into some of the writings of what we call in the Bible the wisdom writings. The wisdom writings primarily consist of 3 books: the Song of Solomon, the Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes. And these 3 books have traditionally been said to have been written by King Solomon. King Solomon was the 2nd king of Israel. He followed right after his father David. And Solomon was given wisdom, Solomon was given riches and wealth, and in so doing, Solomon would then typically write down some of what he was experiencing, things that God inspired him to write. The book of Ecclesiastes is oftentimes referred to his last book, that he's probably sitting back, kind of in his old age, looking back over his life and reflecting, and writing down some things that he's learned along the way. And so, in this book of Ecclesiastes, you'll find the word vanity a lot. He even begins the book, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Oh, that's uplifting. Let's read some more. But what he's saying is that he has experienced a lot of life. And most of what he has done, and most of what he has chased after, has been in vain. And he talks about a few of the stuff. If you go through and you read the book, you'll find out that he says, I chased after money. There's no meaning in that. I chased after possessions. There's nothing that could satisfy. It was vain. I chased after wisdom. It didn't fill that hole in my heart. I chased after the things that everyone else said was important. It was all vain. And he boils life down to just a handful of things that he believes are important. One, he says, we need to eat, we need to drink. These things are important. We need this stuff, and we need to enjoy that. We enjoy the food and the drink that God provides. In our work, don't chase after your work. Find joy in your work. That's important. And then he writes these words. So I'm going to read from Ecclesiastes 4, beginning with verse 7 and going through verse 12. He said, "Next, I saw under the sun something else that was pointless. There are people who are utterly alone, with no companions, not even a child or a sibling. They work hard without end, never satisfied with their wealth. So for whom am I working so hard and depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is pointless and a terrible obsession." Why? Because two are better than one, because they have a good return for their hard work. If either should fall, one can pick the other up. But how miserable are those who fall and don't have a companion to help them up. Also, if two lie down together, they can stay warm. But how can anyone stay warm alone? Also, one can be overpowered, but two together can put up a resistance. A 3-ply cord doesn't easily snap. What else is important? Community. Relationships. Having people there for us. He points out the practicality of some of that. They lived back in the day when there was no air conditioning and there was no heating in their homes. The practicality is when you're alone, it can be a cold night if that temperature goes down, but with someone else, you can stay warm. When you're in battle, if you have been struck down, your odds are not good if you were there all by yourself. But if there is someone else there who has your back and who's fighting alongside of you, they can help you. He understood the practicality of it. But he also, in looking back on his life, reflects on the importance of having community. There was a study that began, I say began because it's still going on. There was a study that began in the middle of the Great Depression in the 1930s. It was a study done by some professors at Harvard College in Boston, The study incorporated them taking a look at 750 teenage boys, and they were going to study their life beginning that moment in the 1930s and go however long they could go. Now, this study is a bit of a miracle because here we are, 77 years later, and the study is still going on. Those things don't happen very often. So, 750 boys, some were from very wealthy families, some were from the poorest families in Boston, and the study began. And every year they connected with these 750. Of course, obviously, they trailed off, they passed away, things happened to their lives and whatnot. Today, there are still 70 of those 750 men alive, and every year they get in touch with them and they ask them how life is going. And so they decided, well, what made for a happy life? And they looked at work, and they looked at money, and they looked at possessions, they looked at all of the stuff. And what it boils down to, and they're still studying these men, but what it boils down to is they found one thing in particular provided happiness over the long haul in these people's lives. And that one thing is relationships. Good, healthy, long-lasting relationships. They even said, when they were in relationships with certain people and they disagreed with them, or they would have arguments with them, or they'd fight with them, because they knew that they were like this, they were able to still have joy even in the midst of that. Because it was the closeness of the relationship that allowed them to feel safe, and that safety also presented itself in good health. And it was all because that some of these guys had good relationships, and it provided joy and happiness for them. Friends, we need community. We need to commit to community, because community has the power to create a happy and healthy life for us. But the kind of community that we commit to is key in all of this. You see, when it comes down to choosing community, there are a lot of options out there for us, right? I mean, we can choose different political communities. We can choose different social communities, economic communities. We can choose different neighborhoods and schooling communities. We can choose people with different moral values as part of our community. One of the things that I think our nation and our culture today prides itself on is having so many choices. And we have a lot of choices, especially as it relates to the community of people that we are going to choose to live into and for them to be a part of our lives. There's a story that goes that someone had gone into a bathroom stall there at a rest area, and inscribed there on the stall wall, someone had written a message there, and the message said something like this: if you are tired of sin, read John 3:16 and turn to God. But if you're not tired of sin, pick up the phone and call 555-1176. We have a choice. We have a choice of the community we decide to surround ourselves with. Now, some of you say, well, I don't have a choice with the people that are in my classroom. I don't have a choice with the people that I work with. And there's some truth to that. But when it comes to developing those close relationships, those people that you are going to allow to speak into your life, people that you're going to surround yourself with, you've got a choice. When I was in youth group, when I was a teenager, it was one of the messages that I heard my youth minister say all the time, and there were times where I almost got sick of it. He kept on always saying, you got to have Christian friends, you got to have Christian friends. And when I look back on that message, I know that there's great wisdom in it. In the moment, though, I was like resisting him, because I was like, well, Jesus hung out with prostitutes and tax collectors and sinners. And Jesus did. And we do have a calling for that. But Jesus also surrounded himself with community, people that he could trust, people that he became close with. And that's what my youth minister was trying to speak into me that day. And again, Solomon even says these words. In the book of Proverbs, again, that book is associated with King Solomon because it's a book of wisdom. And King Solomon was given wisdom by God. We read in Proverbs chapter 13, verse 20, he writes, "Walk with wise people and become wise. Befriend fools and get into trouble." Again, it seems like a no-brainer. But we even have little phrases. We have even modern-day proverbs that go along with this. Birds of a feather flock together. I mean, when we make associations with certain groups of people, we're going to begin to look like them, to act like them, to live our lives like them. There was a study done in the 1950s by a man of all things. His name was Solomon Asch. And he did a study in the 1950s, and in this study, he had 3 lines. And someone would come into the room where there were people already there, and then he would ask them, which line is the longest? There's an obvious answer. Line A was the longest. And if anybody went into the room and did that on their own, everybody said line A, and they were 100% correct. But in this study that he conducted, with a room full of people who were actors, then someone would come in, and then they had no idea all of these people were actors. Someone would come in, and then they would put the lines on the screen and ask, which line is longest? And all the actors in the room, which the one person who had come in had no idea, all the actors would say, well, line C is the longest. And that one person would be like, golly, the line A certainly looks longer, which that was the right answer. But at the end of the study, 75% of the people who came in, looking at the screen, knowing that line A is the longest, but heard everybody else in the room say that line C is the longest, 75% of the people said, yeah, I agree, line C is the longest. It just comes to show the power that the community that we surround ourselves with have in our lives. And Solomon says, choose wisely. It's important for us. When we commit to community, it has the power to influence us, to change us, and to strengthen us in our relationships with God. The book of Hebrews is probably one of my favorite books in the Bible. It's in the New Testament. And my preaching professor, he's written several books on the book of Hebrews. And one of the things that he says about Hebrews is it was written to early Christian group, probably in the 1st century, quite possibly closing in on the 2nd century. But this letter is written to a early group of Christians who need encouragement. And almost all scholars agree to this, that whoever's writing this book, they're trying to encourage a group of Christians. Now, my professor believes that as well, but he believes also that this letter is written to a group of Christians who not only need encouragement, but they're just tired. It's a group of Christians, but they're tired. They're tired of having to continue to serve people when they themselves don't have much to give. They're tired of sneaking around from house to house to go worship God because, depending on who the emperor was, it was illegal. You could lose your life for gathering and worshiping Jesus. They were tired of uttering all of those prayers and feeling like none of those prayers were being answered. They were tired of listening to the preacher go on and on and on and on and on. They were tired. Can you ever relate to this? As a Christian, as a follower of Jesus, in the world that we live in, do you ever just get tired? It'd be a hard journey, especially when we go at it alone. And so Hebrews encourages them, reminds them that they are God's people, reminds them that there is this long legacy of God's people that have gone on before them, and begins to encourage them and says that you even have one another. And so in Hebrews, we read Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. So then, with endurance, let's also run the race that is laid out in front of us, since we have such a great cloud of witnesses surrounding us. Let's throw off any extra baggage, get rid of the sin that trips us up, and fix our eyes on Jesus, faith's pioneer and perfecter. He endured the cross, ignoring the shame for the sake of the joy that was laid out in front of him, and sat down at the right hand of God's throne. Surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. I love that image. My dad was a pilot, and when I was a kid, we had a little Cessna airplane, and sometimes we would just go and take off and go flying. And I love the days when the clouds were, those big old puffy like cotton balls. I loved going flying on those days because we would go up and we would go right into those clouds. And I wanted to just reach out the window and kind of grab a handful of it, But it was amazing when you got into the cloud. It was like you couldn't see a thing. You were completely surrounded. That's the image he's using here. That we need to be surrounded by a community of people who are encouraging us and pushing us forward. I played golf in high school, and it was my last golf match as a senior. And we were playing the Cleveland High School down in Cleveland, Tennessee. And it was a course I never played in. I was in the very last group, and the last hole, the 18th hole, was this par 3, which meant that I should be able to hit it on the green with my first shot, 2-putt it for par. Well, I'm getting up there to the tee box, and one of my teammates is walking back from the green. All my other teammates and my coaches and everybody, they're all around the green. And this one other teammate is walking back, and he's going to meet me, obviously, at the tee box. He's the other senior that was on the team. There was just 2 of us that were seniors. And he said, "Brad, where do you stand?" It's like, "Well, I'm 2 over par." And he said, "If the guy you're playing with pars, then you got a par, and we win the match by 1. And as soon as he kind of said it to me, then all of my teammates who were down there about 180 yards away, they start going crazy. They start cheering. They start yelling my name. They are hooping and hollering, and they are pulling for me. It was like this cacophony of encouragement that they were aiming my direction. And I couldn't believe it. And I got up there on the tee box, I had my 5-iron, and I'll tell you, I addressed the ball. When I addressed the ball, they all got nice and quiet because they don't want to distract me when I was swinging. And I don't remember anything from that point on. I swung, obviously. I remember looking this way thinking I probably ought to be looking that way because I probably hit a terrible shot. And I find the ball in midair heading towards the green. And as soon as I had it, all of my friends and all of my teammates and my coaches, they all start going crazy again. They are hooping and hollering, and it went nuts. It's one of the very first times I truly experienced that great encouragement of people surrounding me in a moment where I wasn't sure if I had what it took or not. And they encouraged me, and they cheered me on. The ball ended up landing about 10 feet from the hole. I made the birdie putt, and we won by 2 strokes. But I have to say that it was their encouragement that got me to that point. One other time I remember sharing some of the tough things in my life as a pastor. This would have been about 13, 14 years ago. I shared some stuff. I went down to take communion, and the entire congregation surrounded me and laid hands on me and prayed over me. Those are the 2 times in my life that I have experienced this great cloud of witnesses literally surrounding me. What a powerful moment that is. And I want that for you. We need community. So, are you willing to put your car in park and open up that door and step out and find community? Y'all got one of these sheets of paper when you came in today, and it invites you to just take an inventory of your community. It's based on Jesus's relationships and Jesus's community. Like, who's your inner circle? 1, 2, and 3. Or who's also that other group of people, about 10, 12 people that you consider your group, your people. And then there may be even a larger group of friends and family that surround you on a regular basis. But I just give this to you today for you, at some point, either today or throughout the week, take some inventory and see, where am I as it relates to forming community around me? Secondly, this is based on this new series that we're in called the Being Challenge. And we are meeting on Thursday nights, 6:30 to 7:30 over in the traditional sanctuary. If you are interested and maybe dabbling in becoming a part of a community, we want to invite you to do that. These books are available for about a $10 donation out at the table out there. Be here on Thursday night at 6:30. If you want to come for dinner, 5:45. We've got dinner right out here in the gathering area, and then we wander over at 6:30 to the traditional sanctuary to do this study together. And then finally, I want you to know that today we're going to end a little early. The band's not coming out. We're going to end just a few minutes early because we have some people who are going to be sitting out at tables in the gathering area with a variety of different groups that they represent. We have our recovery open share groups that happen here every Thursday night. We've got some women's Bible studies that are out there. Right now, we don't have a men's Bible study, but I'll give you some ideas about that here in just a second. There are other groups that are out there. And so what I want to encourage you to do today, since I'm letting you out a little early, is go to one of these tables, maybe ask what their group is like. Because I want to encourage you to find community. I want to encourage you to commit to community. Now, I'm going to be out these doors. And if you, who I want to connect with are the 20 and 30 somethings, whether you're single or whether you're a couple or you got young kids. I want to connect with you. I still think of myself in my 30s, but I'm far from it anymore. But I want to connect with young adults out here, or men who are looking for a men's group. I would love to connect with you. So I'll be out these doors. Everybody else will be out those doors. And you got 7 to 10 minutes to just connect with somebody and to intentionally take that step. I mean, what I'm inviting you to do is what I did on State Route 400 in downtown Atlanta at a toll booth. I'm inviting you to step out of your car and find community. So, let me close with a prayer, and then I'm going to release you. God, we give you thanks that you are a God who desires to be with us, that you desire to have community, you desire to have relationship with us. And that right there at the beginning of the creation story, you said it's not good for us to be alone. Jesus, thank you for creating community right at the beginning of your ministry and showing us what that looks like. And thank you for the wisdom that you have given to us through the writings of King Solomon. We need one another. Two are better than one. A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. So help us, God, if we need to this day, to step out of our door and to commit to community. Because you know more than ever, more than any of us, you know that we need it. Thank you, God. We love you. It's in the name of Jesus we pray. And all of God's people say, amen.